Hoosiers helping Hoosiers across central Indiana. These are our friends and neighbors on 95.5 WFMS.
It is Taylor on Friends and Neighbors, and I'm so excited to introduce you to different organizations in our community and, beyond our community. And today we're very fortunate to have Amanda Moore. She's the CEO of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. I love these kind of opportunities to share our story and hear from other people in our community as well. So I think this is a great segment.
Thank you for being here and for doing the work that you do. But first of all, we have to introduce to anybody that doesn't know, because I didn't know, and I don't know a whole lot about this. What is Angelman syndrome?
So it's a super rare condition. It affects about 1 in 15,000 people here in across the world. But it is basically a loss of function of the UBE3A, which is in the
What is that?
So it's a protein, and it's in the 15th chromosome. So what that means is that Jackson, or individuals like Jackson who have Angelman syndrome,
who is your son?
Who's my son? Yeah, will experience seizures, severe developmental delays. Typically are nonverbal and have really hard issues with sleep. And it's often misdiagnosed as autism, cerebral palsy, something else, because it is so rare and it's only really been diagnosed within the last 30 years. So we have people out there who are in their 40s or 50s that are now getting diagnosed with Angelman syndrome when they were diagnosed for 40 or 50 years with something else because it was so unknown.
Wow.
So, it's usually something that is not really known at birth because it's, with Jackson came out normal, no issues, 48 hours after we're home. And so we didn't really start noticing, and most people with Angelman syndrome, you don't really start noticing anything until you start hitting those developmental milestones and you notice they're not hitting them. And so that's kind of the 30,000 foot level of what Angelman is.
So how old was Jackson when you got a proper, correct diagnosis?
So it was about 18 months, but the only reason why we did get that was because he had his first seizure, and I didn't even know it. So we, of course, 4 months. So just to also put it in context with everyone, Jackson's a twin. And so we had basically a carbon copy of someone right next to him. And we noticed around 4 or 5 months he wasn't doing what Baden was doing.
Okay.
And so we started going to the pediatrician and saying something's going on, something's not right. And so they started doing all the testing, MRIs, EEGs, everything outside of a simple genetic test, which would have given us the answer. And, people kept coming back to us and saying, he's a twin. He's going to be delayed, or he may be on the spectrum, but we don't typically test for that till they're 3.
Okay.
And so let's just wait and see. So a lot of waiting, 6 months, still becoming even more and more delayed, 8 months more and more delayed, kept pushing for answers, not getting them.
Yeah, how are you feeling about that?
Oh, incredibly frustrated, but also scared, because in some ways, even though he wasn't developing, he was still doing something. So in our minds, we're like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe he's just going to be delayed, because there wasn't anything that was, outside of the actual development part of it that was alarming, because we didn't know what a seizure would look like. What we know for seizures is these grand mal seizures, right? Where, people are shaking and it's scary. And we didn't know that there were multiple types of seizures. And so, we kept pushing and kept pushing. And at 18 months, I remember as clear as day, it was a Friday, and we noticed that he was just a little off balance. And so we were like, maybe he has an ear infection, because he wasn't walking at the time. And so he was just falling over a lot. So I took him to the urgent care, and the doctor walked in and, without saying anything, looked at me and said, "Your son just had a seizure. You need to take him to Riley."
Oh my gosh.
So of course, panic.
Yeah.
Rushed and picked up my husband, rushed him to Riley. And within 2 hours, he was having 60 to 70 seizures.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, it was terrifying. And so they hooked him up to the EEG. And then that's when they finally ordered the genetic testing. But there was an intern that was there that had just studied one small paragraph about Angelman syndrome in his in his books.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, this EEG looks a little bit like an Angelman syndrome EEG. So we think that may be what he has. And that's the first time I heard the words Angelman syndrome.
Wow, that is like divine intervention.
It was. I mean, it's not what you want to hear. But
right.
I think when people are going through the diagnosis or the journey of getting a diagnosis, there's some sort of calmness when you finally get it. It's heartbreaking in so many ways because this dream you had of your child changes. In some ways, the dream is crushed, but you finally have answers because then you can tackle and start working on what you need to do. And so, I tell people when we heard that, I can still remember like the smell of the hospital room. I can remember what the hospital room looked like, and it drove me crazy because these hospital rooms at Riley, they try to make them really cheerful, which I appreciate. But in the moment, you're like, why is that elephant smiling at me?
Right.
Like, do they not know like what I just heard, right? And Jackson was sitting in my arms, and I was bawling, and my amazing husband, who's a nurse at Community, he was in nurse mode, asking all the questions.
Oh, that's
and
fortunate.
So it was just, it was definitely a moment. But once we got the diagnosis and looked at the symptoms, it all made sense. No sleep, developmental delays, seizures, a happy I mean, he's always, you've seen the pictures.
Yes.
He's always happy and smiling, obsessed with the water. It described him to a T.
It was like if you are Googling like Angelman syndrome right now, you're going to just see smiling toddlers and smiling babies. They're just like the most cheerful, beautiful smiles.
Absolutely. And so we got the diagnosis, and then, then we were like, okay, now we know what we're going to face. The interesting thing is a lot of people, that Baden and Jackson are not identical twins.
Okay.
So therefore Jackson, Baden does not have Angelman syndrome, but Jackson does. But I will say, just a nod to Baden, because I'm sure he'll listen to this. Baden is his superhero, his wingman. He is the kindest and loving and most awesome brother.
So how old are they now?
So they just turned 8.
Okay.
So Baden's been walking this journey with Jackson for a very long time. And it's so cute. Anytime we go anywhere, Baden will introduce Jackson first and say, this is my brother with Angelman syndrome. He doesn't know how to talk yet, but he's working on it. And it's just beautiful. So he's just the coolest dude around, and I'm so proud of who he's turning out to be. And I think that Jackson has taught him so much about, equity and inclusion and empathy, and Baden's taught, Jackson so much about resilience and just overcoming so much because he's had to at such a young age. So
what is daily life like in your house?
It's very routine.
Okay.
Because those with Angelman syndrome typically don't have meltdowns or do better with a very strict routine. So super early in the morning, that's one thing about Angelman syndrome. They don't really sleep much. So my husband and I really haven't slept for the past 8 years. It's getting a little bit better, but it's always early morning, getting up, and everything's routine. He has seizure medications he has to take 3 times a day. He can now feed himself, but he still needs help with that. He just now is able to actually drink like out of a straw on his own, which we've been working for years to make happen, which is, it's so hard because that's a skill that they get early on. But, our kids work for years to get a skill like that.
Yes.
And then when they get it, it's like, I remember the first time Jackson walked because the doctors told us he would not walk. He would not talk. One of the doctors told us he wouldn't be able to show or verbalize like love, which I thought was just, if you met him now, you'd be like, are you crazy, doctor? Like, this kid knows how to show love more than anything. But I remember the first time he took steps, it was just like,
how old was he?
He was 3. And so
I can't imagine the party
you
must have thrown.
I think we scared him because we were so excited about it. And so it was beautiful. But, we celebrate all the milestones that both of our boys make. But there is something a little bit more, I don't want to say sweeter, but there's something about when Jackson hits a milestone because he works so hard to get there, right? And so, life in our house is pretty chaotic. Like any other house with twin boys who are 8. There's a lot going on, But Jackson is a very much creature of his routine. If he gets off his routine, he gets very stressed and it comes out in his behaviors. And so he is, he gets very anxious. And so we try to keep things very level-headed. We try to get him into water as much as possible. So he did get a Make-A-Wish a year ago, and we got him a hot tub. So him and Daddy are in the hot tub 2 or 3 hours a day. They love that hot tub. And so it's been a huge thing for Jackson because it's where I think he feels like he's not trapped in his body in some ways.
Right.
He just loves the water. So it's great. So, I mean, it's hard to describe a day. It's pretty typical unless there is something that happens, whether it's a seizure, whether it is he hasn't slept. And so he's, just really overwhelmed, or if he's sick and we don't know it, it's going down the checklist to figure out what's going on. Like,
it's harder for him to be able to.
He can't tell us, which that is really the hardest part. He came home a couple of years ago from school and he was so fussy and we couldn't figure out why. And we thought he was just constipated because they have a really bad GI tract. So they get really bad reflux and constipated. Took him to the ER. They did an x-ray of his stomach. He was severely constipated. So we're like, that's what it is. Took him home all night long, was still fussy. And we were like, just beyond ourselves. And I'm like, we got to take him back. Something's going on. So then they ended up x-raying his whole body and found out he had broken his shoulder.
Oh, my goodness.
And we didn't know that he had fallen at school. Wow. And it was horrible. I mean,
I can't imagine what you went through.
Feeling as a parent to know that you just, a child can't simply say, my shoulder hurts or something has happened, right? And so those are really hard times because they, not being able to communicate, even that he simply wants something to drink.
Yeah.
The non-communication is really, really hard for our family right now.
What are his verbal skills?
So he can say mama and baba.
Okay.
And then he's working really, really hard on using a communication device. So AAC, which is augmentative communication.
Okay.
So a lot of kids who are nonverbal will maybe use signing, use an AAC device, or gestures. What he does is he'll come and get us, grab our hand, and take us to what he wants.
Okay.
But he is now able to do a few commands on that iPad to say like more or go.
Wow.
So we're working really, really hard to give him a voice through that. And he goes to Geis Elementary and they're fantastic there and they're working really hard on that. He has amazing therapists through Children's Theraplay, Therapy Redefined that are all working so hard to give him a voice, because that's our goal as a family, is that anyone who is with him, if mommy and daddy aren't there, that he's able to communicate in some way if something is going on.
What is education like for him? Does he go to school with Baden?
He doesn't. He goes to for at least Hamilton Southeastern. We chose as a family that we wanted to get what Jackson needed right now and what was important to him. And they have an amazing class that right now concentrates specifically on communication. So he goes to Geist Elementary, so he's in the school with all the kids, but they're working really, really hard on his speech therapy. He gets his occupational therapy there, his physical therapy, music therapy, but he's also included within the school as well. So it's so fun. I think he's like the mayor of the school. Like goes around and they do like this snack cart for teachers. So he pushes the cart around and gives snacks out. I mean, he's very much entrenched in it. And, I think every family has to get to the point of what inclusion looks for them and that it's okay that everyone has a different lens when it comes to that. I would love for him to be in a classroom with Baden, but then Jackson's not going to get what he needs.
Right.
And what he needs right now is one-on-one work to really be able to give him a voice and teach them some of those life skills like toileting. Like we would love to eventually not have to, that he's potty trained. Yep. That would be a huge breakthrough for him. So they're working hard on those kind of things, and that's what he needs right now.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm sure Baden has learned a lot about patience and,
oh my goodness,
like you said, inclusion and
yes,
tolerance and
so much, and he's teaching his class, which is what I love. I got an email from his teacher a couple months ago, and she's like, I just have to share a story with you. It happened to be on International Angelman Day, which is February 15th.
Okay.
Which is, the 15th chromosome. So that's why they do that. And so...
the day after Valentine's Day.
Exactly. Exactly. And so he, during sharing time, he raised his hand and said, I want to share something. So the teacher said, okay. And he said, today's International Angelman Day. And she's like, well, what does that mean? And so he told the whole class about his brother, about Angelman syndrome. And then it opened up this amazing dialogue with these 7-year-old second graders about how kids are different and how that's okay. And that everyone has different needs and that we should all learn more about everyone's needs and accept everyone's needs.
Gosh.
And those were words from
my
child's mouth. Like, she emailed me and said he taught the whole class today about the importance of accepting all and learning about other disabilities.
At 7.
And I'm like, well, first of all, like, he's got to take all the credit for that, because as much as a parent, Adam and I really hope we instill that on him. But he gets the short end of the stick so much, because when Jackson's having a seizure, when he's having a meltdown or anything, both mommy and daddy have to be on it.
Right.
And often Baden is left in the dust.
Right.
And that as a parent is such a hard balance. And Adam and I are going to bed every night constantly thinking about how much we're messing up Baden.
Oh.
And it's just the reality. A parent with any child with a diverse need or a medical need, I'm sure, faces, because it's hard. And so, when I get messages like that, I think, okay, you know what? We're doing something right, or he's learning through this and he understands in some ways far more than we do what we're experiencing.
Right.
And that his brother's needs are different than his.
I think they're both destined for really great things.
Oh my gosh, right? I mean, if you think about it, I know that you had a chance to talk to my mom, but we adopted our boys. And
can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, sure. So, my husband and I have always wanted to be parents. And so you think as newly married couples that it's going to be really easy to have a baby. Like, you just never know. You never think it's going to happen to you. But we tried for, I think, at least 2 or 3 years, went through the whole fertility thing, and just decided, like, this isn't for us anymore. It was one, it's super expensive. There was no answers. We couldn't figure out what was going on. And we're like, there's so many kids that need homes. Let's just try adoption. So we moved over to adoption and got super blessed to be paired with our birth mom and dad, who just happened to be pregnant with twins. And so we met them when she was 6 months pregnant. So we got to be a part of everything. We were in the delivery room. We were a part of the whole journey with them. They, when they were born, they came right into our hospital room, and it was beautiful. We always tell everyone we got a BOGO, a buy one get one free, which is a joke, but like we never anticipated having twins. But it was destined from the very beginning. And like I said, the delivery in the first 2 or 3 months, there was no indication anything was going on. A lot of lack of sleep, but that's typical for
a newborn, right?
But looking back on all of this now, for anyone who is believes in anything, because I think that you can equate this to any sort of belief, but it's hard to not think that there wasn't a hand in our story.
Right.
Because we wanted so badly and waited so long for these 2 little boys. These 2 little boys come along, and they're amazing and beautiful. And then one is dealt with this blow of having Angelman syndrome. And, from there, the trajectory of my life for sure changed. Because, the one thing that a lot of parents experience, obviously, is grief when they get the diagnosis.
Right.
And for us, it was trying to manage what that grief looked like and how we handled it. And how I handled it was I needed to take action.
Okay.
I wanted to find a cure. I wanted to find resources, and I wanted to know what I could do to better the life of my child and kids like him.
So what did you do?
So I called the Angelman Syndrome Foundation a week after diagnosis and said, what can I do? I joined the board, and about 6 or 7 months into my board stint, they approached me about becoming the CEO of the foundation. So fast forward 4 years, I'm now the CEO of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation.
And they're lucky, in talking to you, they're very lucky.
Well, I am lucky because they were such a huge source for me. But it's such a blessing to be able to support other families through this journey, because I remember every part of the diagnosis. I remember even now, watching Baden play soccer and yearning for Jackson to be out there with him.
Right.
Or, watching, people when we go out and meet friends for stuff, watching all the kids playing together in the pool and running around, and parents sitting back and watching. And Adam or I having to hover around Jackson because he needs extra support and extra care. So there's a lot that goes into this. There's so many amazing moments, but there are so many moments that bring you to your knees.
So if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Amanda Moore. She's the CEO of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. She has twin boys. They're 8 years old. Yeah. One of her sons has Angelman syndrome. And if people are kind of tuning in and they're kind of saying, let's go through some of the symptoms.
Yeah, sure.
So if, somebody has a child that, there's not because it took you a while to get the diagnosis. Yeah. What are some of the symptoms?
Yeah, I would say early on, a lot of our kids early on have feeding issues. So that's one thing that a lot of our families start seeing is there's a lot of reflex, feeding issues, poor sleep. Most kids with Angelman syndrome don't really experience their first seizure really, really early on, but their EEG will look abnormal. So if there's anyone out there listening right now and they've been told your EEG is abnormal, or, and your child has some developmental delays, feeding issues or whatever, demand a genetic test. I think any parent out there that has any sort of question about what is going on, I don't understand. I mean, even I don't even know how many years it's been now. 7 years ago, the fact that it took us a year almost for anyone to do a genetic test is baffling to me.
Yeah.
And so just demand the genetic test. If not, there are so many companies out there right now. We partner with one called Ambit, AMBIT. They do free genetic testing for anyone. All you have to do is go to their website, and they will do the genetic test for free.
Okay, so
to get the diagnosis.
There's some sort of mystery. You want to figure something out.
Absolutely. Because I think
we will post that online.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's a simple genetic test to rule anything out. But feeding issues, lack of sleep, developmental delays. If your child has a really happy demeanor, but is also really stiff, that is something that you see as well. And like I said, it's hard to know with the nonverbal because early when they're babies, they're obviously, Jackson was actually very verbal. He laughed, he giggled and did everything. And so that wasn't anything that was alarming at first. But those are kind of the early on symptoms for sure.
So once that your child is diagnosed with Angelman syndrome, what do you suggest? What advice do you have for parents with a new diagnosis?
So the one thing I always tell families is that there are far more better days with Jackson than bad. So
that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I remember when we got the diagnosis, obviously I thought it was the end of the world, right? There is so much research happening, so many possible treatments to improve the quality of life of our kids. There's tons of research happening. A lot of researchers think that if they can figure out how to basically unlock the paternal gene that produces the UBE3A, that would be huge because it's it's UBE3A. That's what we're dealing with. So if we can unlock the paternal gene, that could be huge. So for that, I would say be hopeful in research. Be hopeful and reach out to the Angelman Syndrome Foundation because we have a resource and a support for anything and everything. And then, like I said, it is a devastating diagnosis to get as far as when you first get it. Far more better days than worse. Jackson has brought something into our life that we would have never, ever experienced. I mean, obviously, I don't want to say I'm so happy he has Angelman syndrome because no one wants to wish this on anything. But that kid has taught us so much about resilience and joy and loving anything and everyone with no expectation. I mean, it's if everyone could look at everyone in the world through the eyes of someone with Angelman syndrome, this world would be a beautiful place. And so I think that don't panic, just reach out. I will also say early on, find someone to talk to, get a counselor. This is not like, this is a hard journey as a caregiver. If you're married, 85% now of families with a child with a special need end in divorce now. It's not easy. Talk to someone early on. Get your children, your other children, get them to talk to someone early on, and don't be ashamed of it. Talk to someone, get a counselor, and let them help you through this, because there will be moments that you will need that perspective and that support.
What does the future look like?
You know, what we always say when people ask me what is our hope for Jackson, we hope that he's happy and healthy and can live somewhat of some sort of independent life. I mean, right now, individuals with Angelman syndrome need 24 hours of care around the clock. But if Jackson can somehow be a productive citizen of this world in some ways and be happy and healthy, Adam and I will be incredibly thankful and blessed by that, because he, like I said, he has so much joy to bring. And I think that I'm hopeful for research. I'm hopeful for treatments. But I'm also living in the knowledge that this is what he has, and we need to be prepared for what long-term looks like. And we just want him to be happy and healthy.
Love that.
Yeah.
What is needed from the world to help speed up, you know, finding treatment and finding a potential cure?
Well, I mean, obviously, money is always the biggest thing, right? This is not a cheap endeavor when it comes to rare diseases. So if anybody out there is, you know, in any way compelled to support, they can always go to angelman.org, and there's a huge donate button. So that's huge, right?
Angelman.org.
Angelman.org. You know, what I think we need more so of, too, is just awareness.
Yes.
I think there's so many people who are not diagnosed or misdiagnosed or are out there alone in this journey. So, you know, if you know someone with Angelman syndrome, or if you know someone who suspects it or doesn't have a diagnosis, like, reach out. I think spreading the word, advocacy is incredibly important. I think that also, as a parent, I'm super concerned about what life looks like for Jackson after he transitions out of high school. A lot of our adults with disabilities do not have a lot of options.
Right.
And that's when you start seeing regression. You start seeing things that are just not fair. They deserve to have things and activities for them to participate in too.
Right.
And so getting out with and advocating for rights in any sort of way for this population is really, really important. Because I think that often that is forgotten about. And so, you know, it's one thing that we push really, really hard as well, is how do we advocate for access, you know, to simple rights for these individuals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing the advocacy work that you're doing. And I hope that, you know, if anybody is wondering about, you know, maybe something's off with their child, you know, to get the genetic testing, the advocacy and the awareness that you're spreading right now is so important. So thank you for being a good friend and neighbor and doing
of course.
Doing
and thank
this.
you for having me. And it's divine intervention that you ran into my mom. So I have to at least put a plug in for her.
Yeah, So I'll tell this story really quickly because we're running out of time. But I was in Fishers. They had a car and craft sale and show, and I saw Soap for Hope.
Yep.
And I said, what is this all about? They told me about you, and here you are.
Yeah. So my mom, who has the most beautiful and special relationship with Jackson, like they are just like kindred spirits, wanted to do something. And so she started making soap, and she sells it and gives portions of the proceeds to the foundation. And she's raised thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And so she's unbelievable. I mean, everything that I'm saying and all the characteristics I have are literally from her and how she's, how she raised me. So yeah, Jackson and Baden Soap for Hope. Go on there, buy soap. That's a great way to support
and
as well.
I will tell you, like,
right?
I have the perfect man soap that I've been bathing in, and it
so
smells wonderful.
Right? She's pretty talented. So, well, I appreciate you so much. It's always great to talk about this stuff. And
yes, you host a podcast.
Yes.
Can they get it through the Angelman Syndrome Foundation website?
Yes, they can, or you can go on Spotify, all those places.
Perfect.
Angelman Podcast. Join us, learn more. It'll be fun.
I love that. Thank you, Amanda Moore, CEO of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Get in touch and tell us about your charitable organization or upcoming event at WFMS.com.
This has been a Friends and Neighbors Community Show. Thanks for listening.